We're at the site of Port Nelson, at the mouth of the Nelson River on Hudson Bay, an abandoned seaport. Let's go have a look. I'm Gordon Goldsborough, past president of the Manitoba Historical Society, radio and newspaper columnist, and author of books on the neglected, the overlooked, the hidden places from Manitoba's past. Join me in this series as we explore backroads to places that tell great stories about how things used to be and how we have ended up where we are today. This is Abandoned Manitoba. Due to the tidal nature of the Nelson River, we have to leave at high tide to ensure we can make it over the many rapids we'll encounter along the way. So, at 4 a.m., we depart in the most impressive jet boat I've ever seen, operated by Nelson River Adventures. Its 800 horsepower double engines power us down the Nelson and make short work of the coastal chop that lies in wait for us closer to our destination. This will be my second visit to Port Nelson. My first visit was 5 years ago, and I'm looking forward to seeing how much has changed since then. We've arrived at the mouth of the Nelson River where it flows into Hudson Bay. This is the site of Port Nelson. It was supposed to be the seaport that Churchill became. It was constructed starting in 1912. It was abandoned before it was completed, and here it is over 100 years later. We've arrived, we're going to have a quick look around, but I think to really get a full sense of the scope of this site, we should put a drone up in the air. I quickly briefed the rest of my traveling party on the layout of the site and go over our safety protocols. This is polar bear country, so we must always travel in groups with a firearm present in case we surprise a bear. Then it's time to send up the drone.
Take off. The home point has been updated. Please check it on the map.
Port Nelson was constructed between 1913 and 1917 as part of the Hudson Bay Railway, linking the Pas with a planned port facility on Hudson Bay at the mouth of the Nelson River. The idea was to provide an additional seaport for the shipping of grain and other material from Western Canada to overseas markets. A huge dredge, believed to be the most powerful one in the world at the time, was built at a shipyard in Toronto and shipped up to the construction site. It began dredging material from the bottom of Hudson Bay to create an artificial island about 1/2 mile offshore. Eventually, a large grain terminal would be built there. To connect the island with the mainland, an impressive 17-span steel truss bridge was erected. Unfortunately, shortages of money and construction workers during the First World War halted the work before construction was completed. One of the important pieces of evidence that you can use for dating a site like this are the rails, because it was a common practice to mold into the rails when they were being manufactured the name of the manufacturer, sometimes the weight of the rails, and the year of manufacture. And, well, here we go, right here. Lackawanna, 300, and the year 1913. They started building in 1912. This is perfect. This is completely contemporary with the port. They brought this rail at the very beginning as they were starting to build Port Nelson. The terrain here is rocky, slippery, and deceptively treacherous, as one of our director cinematographers found out twice. Oh. Okay, let's see if I can climb this wall. I'm going to see if I can climb onto the bridge that links the artificial island to the mainland. If Port Nelson had been completed, this bridge would have been used to convey railway cars full of prairie grain to the terminal for loading onto ocean-going vessels. Yeah, I walked down 3 of these spans last time I was here. The question was, how the heck did I get up there? You can see all the lichen growing on this wood. I mean, it's all just breaking down, and man, it's much worse than when I was here last time. Now, I have to get over there. So let's go down here. And down here. Oh, this is maybe promising. Let's just try this. Wow, things have really changed in the 5 years since I was here last time. As I look down them now, I see that they're even more bent out of shape. Even 5 years ago, they were in better orientation, like they were all more or less even. And you can see now some of them are bent to the north, some of them are bent to the south. And wow, I'm not even sure I would want to try, even if it was possible, just because, you know, they're not that great a shape anymore. When this dredge was built in southern Canada, its official name was the Dredge Port Nelson, because the plan was that its entire life would be used here at Port Nelson, first to construct the port and then later to maintain the port. Its official name, well, gave way to the $1 million dredge, because that's what it cost by the time they built it. By the time they moved it up here, it cost $1 million, and that's a lot of money even today. Keep in mind, though, that this was over 100 years ago. It was a vast sum of money just for the dredge.
The massive dredge that had created the artificial island, and which would have been used to maintain the port facility after it became operational, was doomed by an event that occurred while the construction site was mothballed. On the 1st of November, 1924, the site was hit by a huge windstorm that pushed up a wall of water 24 feet high. The water picked up the dredge, which had been dry docked on land, and deposited it crossways on a timber seawall of the artificial island. There it sat, perched precariously. Because the storm had been higher than any normal tide at the site, there was no way to get the dredge off the seawall. It still sits there today, nearly 100 years later.
I mean, you can see this big jagged tear. You know, and that's not small weight metal, and that's pretty heavy stuff. Clearly it took an enormous amount of force to tear that. Wow. Well, and here, this wood, this is the seawall that it was sitting on, and you think, well, all the rest of the seawall, the wall between here and there has all gone. It's all been eroded away. But here, because it's got the dredge draped over it, it's still here. This is what killed the dredge, this stack of timbers.
With its back broken from the accumulated stress of nearly a century, the dredge makes a perfect climbing frame to explore, top to bottom, port to starboard, and bow to stern.
Now the unfortunate thing is I don't know the layout of the ship. I have never found a schematic that would say what each room was. But I mean, these two rooms, these two right here, were right into the mess hall. So, you know, maybe, conceivably, they were quarters for some of the crew. Of course, you can see all of the places where the crew was expected to walk. They had this sort of stippled metal to give it a little more traction. You know, because you can imagine if you were walking out here in a squall, in a storm, and there was water on the deck and it was now potentially slippery, that could be really treacherous. Yeah, let's look at down some of these pipes down here. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. I mean, I know I'm using that word many times, but it's just, I can't think of a better description. It's just so massive, you know, on a scale that we just cannot imagine today. And just say torn apart as though it was just a rag doll.
As the day progresses, a strong wind develops, making the route to the mainland unnavigable by canoe and kayak. I want to investigate what may be left on the mainland, so I need to come up with a new plan, and quick. Okay, so we're going to send the drone over to the land because I'm really interested to see what sort of buildings are over there. There was at one time an entire village to support 700 construction workers. The buildings were all abandoned along with the island, so I'm assuming that some of the buildings are still there. We'll find out. Yeah, we're just approaching the shoreline. At one time, when the site was active, there would have been a whole series of cribs that sort of reinforced the shoreline against erosion. I'm told that they might still be there, but I don't see any evidence. We're just going into shore now. We're crossing over onto land, and I don't see much evidence of them. Oh, what's this? It looks like a little lake, but it's actually a lake with very straight boundaries. It must be the remains of a foundation that is filled with water. Wow, that's cool. In addition to the buildings, there were also railway tracks. They used little railway cars to carry supplies around the site, and I don't see any evidence of those. I mean, they're there probably, but they're completely buried in vegetation. You know, this site was cleared during the construction, but obviously the plants have reclaimed the site. Oh, here's another building. Ooh, oh yeah, oh man. It's collapsed. Woo. You know, probably over the years the snow would collect on the roof, and just gradually the wood would give way. Of course, they weren't maintaining it at all. They weren't repairing anything. So, you know, over the period of 100+ years, it doesn't take too long before it's all gone. Wow. Okay, so there's another building back there. Oh, got to go back over there now. Let's have a look at that one. Let's see. Oh, actually, there's one's over. Oh, there's actually lots of buildings here. I think a drone is absolutely essential for the kind of work that we're doing. You know, it gives you a perspective that you just can't get any other way. I mean, in this case, the vegetation is very dense. Like, I don't know whether we could even walk over there. It would be so dense. And the other issue, of course, is that because there are polar bears in this region, it's conceivable there could be a bear lurking in there. We would never see it until we were right on it. So, you know, having an eye in the sky, it's more effective and it's definitely safer. We've been here now for several hours, and in the background we can see an exposed mudflat. It's low tide, and that reveals the fundamental flaw of Port Nelson. The water here is shallow, and it always will be. They realized that when they started to work here. They realized they would have to dredge to build it. They realized they would have to dredge to maintain it. Always, going forward, the big ocean-going ships simply could not come to the terminal here unless they'd continue to dredge. And that was going to be a problem. So in the 1920s, when they came back and with sober second thought, looked at what they had already built, they thought, well, maybe we should look at another possibility. So they went to the mouth of the Churchill River, and there they found the deep water port that they had always wanted. And so instead of completing the work here at Port Nelson, they abandoned everything. They moved what they could to the mouth of the Churchill River, and there they built the modern-day seaport of Churchill. Well, the reality is that time marches on, and nature chips away slowly at the creations of humans, and it's inevitable that what we see left here today will someday be gone. You know, so the reality is, it's always a good idea to visit a place when you have the opportunity, because we know that they aren't going to be around forever. And this site, I think, if nothing else, reveals the hubris of humans to create something where it really wasn't desirable. And we've, of course, learned a lesson at least, and through the abandonment of Port Nelson, we see what is and what is not possible when you're trying to create an oceanic seaport.